Maybe you've seen the movie or TV versions, but this is the real story of Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow's most notorious and violent crimes, some of which were pulled off with a little help from the American government. One of Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow's earliest crimes together happened on March 11, 1930, when she helped break him out of jail. They'd only been dating for about 2 months at that point. He was locked up for burglary in a county jail in Waco, Texas, and was due to be transferred to a much bigger prison in Huntsville. One of Barrow's cellmates, William Turner, had a revolver hidden away in his East Waco home, and Parker was tasked to retrieve it and smuggle it in. As Jeff Gwynne wrote in his book, Go Down Together, The True Untold Story of Bonnie and Clyde, it was a watershed moment for Bonnie. She'd been reveling in her new real-life role as a convicted criminal supportive lover, but there was nothing illegal about that. She could walk away from Clyde Barrow anytime she liked, innocent of the slightest wrongdoing. Parker returned to the jail with a gun hidden away by a belt underneath her dress and successfully passed the revolver off to Barrow.
Where'd you get that?
That isn't important.
Barrow, Turner, and a third prisoner used the gun to escape. They were quickly recaptured in a matter of days, but this incident would nevertheless foreshadow a notorious criminal partnership. After his escape attempt, Clyde Barrow was eventually sent to the notorious Eastham Prison Farm, where he ended up committing his first murder. He encountered Ed Crowder, an inmate who was notorious for violence against other inmates. Crowder frequently beat and sexually assaulted Barrow for nearly a year. Eventually, another inmate named Aubrey Scally urged Barrow to kill Crowder and let him take the fall. Scally despised Crowder and was already serving a life sentence, so taking responsibility for killing another prisoner meant nothing to him. On October 29, 1931, Barrow baited Crowder to follow him into the shower, where he fatally struck him with a pipe. Scally quickly appeared and decorated the scene by cutting himself and stabbing Crowder's body multiple times. But even with Crowder gone, Barrow was forced to continue enduring Eastham's brutal labor system for several months until his mother's vigorous campaigning got him an early parole on February 2, 1932. Despite avoiding a long prison sentence, Barrow was completely transformed by his incarceration. Upon his parole from prison, Clyde Barrow quickly reunited with an elated Bonnie Parker. Shortly afterwards, she began running with him and his fellow outlaw Ralph Foltz. The group reportedly made a stop in Kaufman, Texas, and they were immediately impressed by the amount of guns at a local hardware store. After stealing some cars in a nearby town, they returned to the store late at night, but they attracted the attention of its night watchman Tom Jones, and a shooting match quickly ensued. This woke the town up, and the criminal trio's attempted escape was thwarted at every turn, thanks in part to a downpour that caused the sludge-filled terrain to ruin their vehicles. They ended up stealing a couple of mules to get to the city of Kemp, where they then stole a car belonging to a local doctor. But the vehicle broke down after a mile, putting them in harm's way as the angry posse of townsfolk were close behind. The mob ended up chasing the trio and shooting Foltz in the arm. Barrow dashed ahead on his own while promising to come back for Parker. She and Foltz were quickly overcome and captured. Just months after reuniting with Barrow, Parker would find herself behind bars.
Bonnie has made a switch to investing in this persona in which what honor means is to stick to your man no matter what.
Although Bonnie Parker was now in jail, Clyde Barrow continued running a crew. In April 1932, he was involved in killing a man named John Napoleon Bucher, a business owner in Hillsborough, Texas, who ran a successful general store and gas pump and also sold jewelry. Barrow had learned of the business years earlier from Bucher's son. Strapped for cash, Barrow, Ted Rogers, and Johnny Russell set their sights on Bucher's store after staking the business out and learning that it had a sizable safe. On the evening of the burglary, the trio arrived at Bucher's store, with Barrow serving as the driver. The store was closed at the time, but Bucher woke up and allowed Rogers and Russell in, supposedly to buy a 25-cent guitar string. The two criminals pulled out $10, so Bucher headed to the safe to make change. When Rogers and Russell pulled out their guns, Bucher attempted to do the same, but he was shot and killed by Rogers. When Rogers and Russell emerged with the stolen cash and jewelry, they immediately informed Barrow of what happened, and he realized the trouble they were now in. Barrow was right to be alarmed, as his photo was one of the first ones picked out by Bucher's wife when she was shown photos of potential suspects. By August 5, 1932, Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker were reunited after her release from jail. While Parker returned to her mother's house, Barrow and his gang headed to Stringtown, Oklahoma, stopping at an outdoor dance to score some booze and steal a car. This suspicious activity attracted the attention of the local sheriff, C.G. Maxwell, and his deputy, Eugene Moore. When the lawmen approached the strange visitors, they were quickly met with gunfire. Maxwell was seriously wounded, while Moore was killed. The next day, Barrow and his associate Raymond Hamilton grabbed Parker and headed to Carlsbad, New Mexico, hoping to lay low at her aunt's farm. However, Carlsbad was a hotbed of car theft activity, and the car that Clyde was driving was stolen. That didn't go unnoticed by Chief Deputy Sheriff Joe Johns. When the lawmen confronted the trio, chaos erupted. Parker, Barrow, and Hamilton quickly took Johns as their prisoner and left the farm. While the deputy was eventually let go 15 miles outside of San Antonio, the shooting in Stringtown had completely altered Clyde's reputation from a run-of-the-mill roaming bandit into a hardened and despicable cop killer. Despite the brutal murder of Deputy Moore, Parker remained steadfastly loyal to Barrow, frequently defending his heinous actions to friends and family. In 1933, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow's gang went on an untethered rampage against law enforcement. In January of that year, a group of Texas officers traveled to the home of Raymond Hamilton's sister. They hoped to lay a trap there for a notorious bank robber, Odell Chambliss, who allegedly often visited the house.
We rob banks.
However, the officers were instead ambushed by Barrow, who brandished a shotgun and fatally shot Deputy Malcolm Davis in the chest. Then in April of that year, Parker, Barrow, his older brother Buck Barrow, Buck's wife Blanche, and W.D. Jones rented a garage apartment in Joplin, Missouri. They were quickly found by Missouri lawmen, and a vicious shootout ensued that took the lives of two officers, Detective Harry McGinnis and Constable Wes Harriman. After the killings in Joplin, the Barrow gang went on the lam as news of their duel with the police spread like wildfire across the Midwest. The group's luck took a massive hit that June when Parker suffered serious injuries after Clyde crashed their car outside of Wellington, Texas. Suddenly, the Barrow gang found themselves in desperate need for money to get her medical attention, a monumental task for notorious criminals who were wanted in multiple states. So Buck and Jones went on a robbery spree near Fort Smith, Arkansas, where they killed H.D. Humphrey, a town marshal from Alma. One of the most troubling patterns displayed by Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow during their notorious criminal run is that they were always well armed. Upon their death in 1934, they were found to be carrying an entire arsenal of guns, everything from ammunition and pistols to shotguns and rifles. Ironically enough, the United States government was in a way their most reliable weapons supplier. Throughout their time as fugitives, they made it a habit of robbing National Guard armories across different states. In July 1933, while Parker was nursing an injury, Barrow and two associates stole from the State Armory in Eden, Oklahoma. They took 5 Browning automatic rifles, more than 40 Colt 45s, and thousands of rounds of ammunition, which filled their car to the brim. 2 months later, they raided another armory, this one in Illinois. Then, in early 1934, Parker and Barrow, along with 3 others, were charged for the theft of 4 rifles and 13 pistols from an armory in Ranger, Texas. The regular robberies of National Guard armories allowed the pair to always be prepared for a gunfight against law enforcement. Thus, in many cases, they were consistently packing superior heat, all thanks to Uncle Sam.
Uncle Sam?
1 year after the murder of Deputy Malcolm Davis, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow achieved one of their most notorious criminal triumphs when they orchestrated a raid at Eastham. Barrow had long planned to exact some type of revenge against a prison that scarred him for life. However, his and Parker's constant clashes with the law and run of bad luck always seemed to keep this goal at bay. That is, until 1934. On January 14th of that year, Parker and Barrow put their plan into motion by strategically planting 2 Colt 45s under a bridge near the prison for a contact inside to retrieve. 2 days later, with work crews outside, the guns were used to ambush Major Joe Crossan, one of the prisoner's mounted overseers. He would succumb to his wounds 11 days later. During the ensuing commotion, several prisoners escaped, with Barrow covering them with heavy machine gun fire. On April 1, 1934, in Grapevine, Texas, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow once again found themselves facing down the law. But this time, the officers had no idea who they were. Spotting a swank black Ford V8 with fancy wheels parked on a side road, Texas Highway Patrol officers H.D. Murphy and E.B. Wheeler believed that they had encountered a group of struggling motorists who needed some help. But when they approached the vehicle, they were greeted with gunfire. Over the years, it's been claimed that Parker gleefully stood over one of the dying officers before shooting him again. She then allegedly exclaimed, "His head bounced just like a rubber ball." However, according to John Neal Phillips' book, Running with Bonnie and Clyde, Parker didn't shoot either of the officers. Instead, Wheeler was killed by the hot-headed Henry Methvin, who ran with the famous duo during their final days, while Murphy was killed by Barrow. Regardless of who pulled the triggers, the Grapevine killings propelled Bonnie and Clyde's already nefarious reputation even further and put them on the path of killing yet another lawman.
They call them cold-hearted killers. They say they are heartless and mean.
After the Grapevine murders, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow went on the run along with Henry Methvin and made their way to a hideout in Commerce, Oklahoma. When Constable William Calvin Campbell and City Marshal Percy Boyd found them on April 6th, they didn't know who they were. Instead, they assumed that they were dealing with a group of raggedy drunks sleeping in the car. After spotting the lawmen approaching, Barrow attempted to drive away. However, the muddy terrain sent the car sprawling into a ditch, and a gunfight ensued. Unfortunately, Campbell and Boyd were severely outgunned, as their pistols were no match for the gang's Browning automatic rifles. Some accounts claim that Barrow killed Campbell, while Parker and Methvin wounded Boyd's forehead and then took him hostage. Others say that Methvin was the one to kill Campbell. No matter who pulled which trigger, what is certain is that Campbell died from the gunshot wound to the midsection, and Boyd did indeed receive a grazing head wound and was then taken hostage and eventually released. Campbell would ultimately be the last lawman killed by this infamous duo. That was because they were killed soon after, on May 23, 1934, when they were ambushed along Louisiana State Highway 154. At the time of their deaths, Bonnie Parker was 23, while Clyde Barrow was 25.